Great, well thank you and good evening everybody. As you said, I'm Steve Booker, Director of Financial Aid at Rollins. What I'm going to talk with you about tonight though is about financial aid in general. This doesn't have anything to do with Rollins. We're going to walk you through the different types of aid, how you get aid, and give you some tips and tricks on how to get it. I've been doing financial aid now for over 25 years. I've worked at lots of different schools. I'm actually from the Midwest. Grew up in Illinois, went to a school up in Northern Illinois, moved over to Indiana, worked at a large public university there as well as a medium-sized private. And then I found paradise coming down here to Florida, so I love being down here. But I tell you all that so you know that I do have a lot of experience in where I've been. So regardless of your questions, I probably know the answer, and if I don't, I've got a connection with somebody that will. So if you have questions at the end, please let me know. I'll be happy to go through those. So let's start with what is financial aid. And financial aid is really designed to help bridge the gap between what it costs to go to college and what you can afford to go to college. A lot of what we're going to talk about is need-based aid, meaning it's based on income and there's a separate application that you'll have to do, but there are some merit-based opportunities for your students based on grades and maybe test scores. So we'll go through all those different options as well. I always start with misconceptions because I hear these every year. There's always parents that ask me these different questions and I want to make sure to get them out in front. First one is I'm going to wait till I receive my admission information or results of my admission application. And what I tell folks is don't wait on admission, because right now, I should ask this, are you seniors in the room? Everyone seniors? Okay. So all of you have probably been working on admission applications, but you probably haven't heard yet because most of them haven't responded. They typically wait till later in the fall or sometimes even in the spring before you'll find out for admission. So don't wait on that. Get the financial aid application in. October 1st is when it opened. And I'll talk through on how you do it and all those different parameters. But get the financial aid application done. That way, as soon as you hear from admission, you should hear very quickly from financial aid as well on how much financial aid you qualify for. If you do it the opposite, if you wait to hear from admission, like I said, it might be the spring before you hear from them, and now you're behind the 8 ball in getting your FAFSA done and all the financial aid pieces. I make too much money. So the FAFSA does ask for income information. It's going to ask for you to transfer information from your tax returns onto it. And there are some numbers that they look at, but it's also based on number in the household. It's based on where you're going to school in terms of what college your students are interested in. So I tell families all the time, the magic number, I guess, is maybe $1 million. If you have $1 million of income or assets, you don't have to do the FAFSA because there's probably not any school that would provide need-based financial aid for you. But if it's under that, there's too many other variables in there. Doesn't mean you're going to qualify, but everyone I talk with wants to maximize all their opportunities. So I tell you, do it your first year. It's free, and that way you know for sure whether you qualify or not. If you don't qualify, then you don't have to do it in a subsequent year. But if you do qualify, then you can do it every year and you'll find out. But that way you've turned over every rock and found every dime you can to help pay for the education. The FAFSA is intrusive or it takes too long. It's gotten a lot better. So FAFSA has reduced the number of questions that they've asked. They use what's called skip logic. So if you answer something that it doesn't apply to you, it's not going to ask you those same questions down the road. So it's gotten better. There still are a lot of questions and it still will probably take you maybe 45 minutes to get it done, but don't let that stop you. If you need help with it, reach out. There's lots of folks that can help you fill out the FAFSA. Valencia does their FAFSA Frenzy activities, and those are virtual, those are online. They'll help you with it. If you need help, you can talk with the college or university that your students are interested in, or you're certainly welcome to reach out to me. Just let me know that you came to one of my high school nights and you just have questions on the FAFSA. I'm happy to help you fill it out, happy to help you get it done. We want to make sure you get as much aid as possible wherever you go. So again, doesn't have to do with Rollins. Just let me know you're at a high school night and we'll get you set up. And then the last one is, you should call the FAFSA people. And there's a 1-800 number on the FAFSA that they can help you with different boxes on the FAFSA, and if you have username and password issues, but really that's about it. Anything else, you really want to talk with a college or university that your student's interested in. And the reason why is that college or university can be more holistic. They're going to tell you about state aid that you're eligible for at that college. They're going to tell you about the federal aid and most importantly the institutional aid. So all those things that college can talk with you about, whereas if you call FAFSA, they're only going to tell you what fits into the boxes and if it impacts federal aid, which is again a small piece of the puzzle. So utilize your financial aid office to help with those questions. All right, so let's get into different types and sources here. So different types of financial aid fall in these buckets here. So scholarships and grants are what we refer to as gift aid. It's free money. Money doesn't have to be repaid, and that's where we want to maximize all those opportunities. Loans and employment, or you might refer to as work study, We refer to it as self-help aid. It's where students either have to repay it in terms of loans or they have to earn it in terms of employment or work study. All of those types of aid are going to come from these 4 sources: the feds, the state of Florida, and we're very fortunate, state of Florida, that we've got a lot of opportunities here to stay in state and you get a lot of financial aid from the state. The institutions themselves, that's actually the largest source of financial aid out there, is the college and university that your student's applying to, and then private sources like outside scholarships. And there's a lot of those dollars that I'll give you some tips on how to get those scholarships. So we're going to start with scholarships here and go through some different types. So again, scholarships are aid that doesn't have to be repaid. It's going to be awarded based on merit or skill. So typically merit means GPA of the student in school, or it might mean test scores like ACT or SAT. Skill might be like talent-based awards like athletics or music or theater or art or any dance, any of those types of programs. It's considered non-need based, meaning it doesn't matter what the income of the family is. There's no income-based form that you have to fill out. It's all going to be based on the student's results in high school. So the specific ones that we'll talk about, we'll start with the state of Florida. Bright Futures is a great program. If you haven't heard of it, it's a great opportunity for your students to get their tuition covered at lots of different institutions in-state. Students stay in-state. If they go to a public university like a UCF or a UF or an FSU, all the different programs, I'm not going to leave anybody out on purpose, so don't get offended. But any of the public colleges or universities, if you get the academic scholars level, it covers 100% of tuition at that school. If you get the medallion level, it covers 75% at that school. If you go to a private university like a Rollins or a Stetson or a Tampa, again, all the different Miami's another great one, it covers those amounts up there. $211 a credit hour, which works out to be about $6,700 a year, or $158 a credit hour, which is about $5,000 a year. The main difference between whether it's academic scholars or medallion is test score. There is a slight difference in GPA and slight difference in community service hours. Students typically meet at community service hours like crazy. They're doing way more community service hours than I ever did in high school. So that's usually not the issue. It's usually a test score, so ACT or SAT score. So what I tell students all the time is, you're gonna, like, if you're taking one of those tests, you're gonna do better on one of those tests, and I'm gonna do better on one of them as well. The only way to know is to take it. So you might be better at the SAT, I might be better at the ACT. The only way for sure to know is to take both of them. So if you take one and you didn't get up to the academic scholars level, take the second one. So if you took the SAT first, take the ACT next. See which one is higher. And if you're still not quite there, take that second one that you're highest at again. So I'll take the SAT as an example, because that's an easier example. SAT is made up of 2 subsets of scores. There's a verbal and a math score that add in together to get your SAT score. If you take the SAT once and you take it one more time, the state of Florida will take your highest math score on either test and then your highest verbal score on either test and create a super scored SAT. So that's why you want to take it that second time, so you can get that boost if you're not quite at the academic scholars level. ACT is the same way, it just is a different calculation in the way it works. So take the SAT, take the ACT, whichever one gets you closest to the academic scholars level, take that test again. And then that way, maybe that'll boost you up. This is one where taking that test equates to dollars. So it's why your students do need to take it. I know they love taking tests all the time, but make them take it at least once and preferably twice, again, if they're not at that academic scholars level. If they're still not there, they can take it more times, so you can keep working with them on it. They could focus on a subset. Maybe it's the math subset that they need to do a little bit more, and they could focus on that, get that score up. Maybe that'll put them up to the level for super scoring. They have until the summer, even after they've graduated, before they qualify. So the way the state will set it in, so you're all seniors in the room, so they have technically through July of 2023, I'm not comfortable saying 2023 yet, but July of 2023 to take those tests. I think the last test is usually in June though. So just make sure you plan that out. If your student hasn't taken those tests yet, get them to take it as soon as possible so you can get a baseline, and then again, take one of those other tests as quickly as you can. But typically they're offered a couple times each semester, so just get on that. The Benequisto Scholarship Program is a really cool program with the state of Florida. So again, this is available at any of the schools here in Florida, whether it's public or private. This one, stay with me for a second because there's a couple steps to it. So when your student was a junior or maybe a sophomore, they might have taken the PSAT. So there's different scores that get sent up to College Board, and then also gets referred on to National Merit Corporation. And it's a nonprofit group. The National Merit Corporation then takes a list of all those. They take a certain percentage of those and creates a semifinalist list. And they send out a notice, typically in December of the senior year, so it'd be for your students. You would hear in December if your student's a semifinalist. If they get that semifinalist notice, they might get a finalist notice in typically February, so February 23. If you get that finalist letter from National Merit Corporation, says your student's a finalist and they qualified for a National Merit Corporation scholarship, it's usually $2,500, give that letter to the college or university your student's interested in, because then they probably will qualify for Benequisto, which is up to another $20,000 on top of everything else they've gotten. So that's a really great program for your student to stay in state, to have tuition plus a good portion of room and board covered, if not all of it. So just stay on the lookout. Kind of the takeaway is you get that letter, talk to the college or university here in Florida that your student's looking at. They'll be able to look at it, because there are a few exceptions to that, but they'll let you know for sure one way or the other. That's the state of Florida. So institutions themselves, again, offer lots of different scholarships. Merit-based are the primary ones that are out there, again, based on GPA. A lot of schools now are going test optional, a lot of colleges. When I say schools, I mean colleges, universities. They're going test optional, meaning you don't need to submit an ACT or SAT score, so just check with the college if they require it. You still want to do it because of Bright Futures, though. Bright Futures is not eliminated. You got to do it for Bright Futures. If your student didn't score well, though, check with the college, because they might just look at your GPA for scholarships for that school. And it can range anywhere from a couple $100s on up to full tuition, room and board, depending on that school. Most cases, they're going to look at your GPA. They might do a core GPA, meaning they're going to pull courses out, and they're going to look at just English and math and science, social studies, foreign language, things like that to create the GPA. But it's up to that school how they do it. They might look at test scores. They might require test scores, so it's up to that school. Make sure you check with the college or university that your student's interested in. The other key is to look for deadlines. So you want to make sure you've met every deadline for that school to get the admission application in and all the materials that they need, the transcript, test scores, or anything, essays, anything else they need. Your student may have a 4.0 GPA and they might have the best test scores, but they missed that deadline, they would miss the scholarship. So just look for it. Easiest way is to go to the website. You can also call the admission office. They'll tell you right away what the dates are. The other thing is to ask if there's a separate application for the scholarships. In general, most admission offices just uses the admission application, but some require a separate application. So just check on it. Again, on the website should have it, as well as you can call the admission office. They'll give you that information. Talent-based awards is a separate process, so there is additional things that you need to do for that. If your student's interested in athletics and playing in a college, they do need to contact the coach as soon as possible. Lots of coaches are committing their dollars further and further in advance, so you want to make sure the coach knows about you and has funds available if your student wants to play sports at that particular school. Usually if you go to the website, there's a place that you can contact the coach and fill out a form, and that way they get the information. Other talent-based awards are those music, art, theater, dance kind of awards. There's, again, an extra step. There could be an audition that's needed, a portfolio that's needed. So check with that school, see what their dates are, see if there's a separate application, which typically there is. Usually they wait until after your student's admitted, but you still want to get on their radar, get registered for them. A lot of them will have dates in the spring, so you can go and get registered for those auditions and that right now. The last one up here are private sources. So these are the outside scholarships. You might have heard of some of these, and you might hear in the news that millions of dollars goes unspent and all these dollars are out there for you. And that's really not true. These organizations are creating these scholarship sources to give money away for tax purposes. So the money's being given, but what's happening is a few students are getting a lot of those dollars because they're putting the time and effort into it. And that's what I've experienced at every school I've been at. Only a few students bring a lot. It's not a lot get a few of these scholarships. It's a few students get a lot of these scholarships because it takes a lot of time to get those applications in. These two websites up here, fastwebandscholarships.com, they're free sites to use. You create a profile on there. The student would enter their interests, their major, organizations they might belong to, their grades, things like what year in school they are, they're a senior in high school, and then it should kick out scholarships that your students can apply for. They don't offer scholarships, nor do they charge for anything, but it's back when I went to school, I went to the library, pulled out a big book, and just thumbed through it and tried to find them. This helps shore that up. It's like the kayak, I guess, of flights here. But they're really good resources, again, free to use. Story I always tell when I give these presentations, when I was back in the Midwest, I did a scholarship workshop for a school that I worked at, and the second year I did it, a student came up to me and said, you know, I did all the things you said last year, and all I got was a $500 scholarship. And so that's great, that helps with books, and you know, every little bit matters. And yeah, but I really put a lot of time and effort into it. And I knew the kid, so I knew that wasn't really true, but like, okay. For fun, let's say you spent 10 hours of work into this, and you got a $500 scholarship. I'm not a math major, but that's 50 bucks an hour. What if you'd have put 20 hours or 30 hours into it? Could you have gotten more? And the answer is possibly. It's not guaranteed, but everyone that I've spoken with, all the students, they put that extra time and effort into it to get those extra scholarships. So it does almost feel like a full-time job at times in the spring. Most scholarships come available in January and February for your student's senior year. But if you sign up now, you'll find those early on, and your student can start to develop essays that then they can just tweak to add to those different scholarships that are out there. They can get a good application ready that's easy to put in other places. So do it while it's easy right now. If you wait till the spring, you're going to be inundated. Your student's going to do a few of them and say, that was a lot of work, I don't have any more time to do it, and they don't. I know students don't have a lot of time. So if you can plan earlier, you'll have a better opportunity to apply to more scholarships. And again, there's not a magic number. Don't stop at 10, don't stop at 50. Any of the things that your students qualifies for, have them apply for it. Most scholarships are out there as an incoming first-year student in college. Once you get to college, there's not a lot for returning students that are out there. So this is the best opportunity for your student to get those scholarships. All right, so let's change it a little bit and get into grants. Grants are similar to scholarships, and that's free money. It doesn't have to be repaid. It is typically going to be based on financial need. There's a couple examples where it's not, but for the most part, a FAFSA is required, which is the financial aid application to get any type of aid. So the first one we're going to start with is from the state of Florida as well, and it actually is not one that requires the FAFSA, but it's the Effective Access to Student Education, or EASE grant. This is for any private college or university in the state of Florida. Again, a Stetson, a Rollins, a Tampa, Florida Southern, any of those, Miami, any of those schools, the student automatically will get $2,000 as long as you're a Florida resident, which you all are since you're here in school. You just have to prove that you're a Florida resident, simple form that you'll do. The rest of these do require an additional financial aid form, or FAFSA, that we'll talk about. Florida Student Assistance Grant is the biggest, and that's $3,260 max. It is one that I refer to as a limited funded grant, meaning that each college gets a certain amount of dollars from the state of Florida. Once those dollars are gone, they can't give any more away because it's gone. So if you remember back at the scholarship level, I was talking about watching for deadlines for admission scholarships. Same thing for this grant. Make sure you look at the financial aid site for your college or university that you're interested in. See if they have any deadlines as well. If they do, make sure you meet that deadline, because once you get past that deadline, it means they may not have any more Florida Student Assistance Grant or some of the other limited-based funds available. That amount will vary from school to school, again, depending on their dollars that they have available. Federal government also offers a couple grants. The Pell Grant is one that you'll find out if you fill out the FAFSA. If you qualify, it'll say you qualify for a federal Pell Grant. If you don't qualify, it just won't say anything. So if you do your FAFSA and it doesn't say anything on there about a grant, don't worry about it. It's only the federal Pell Grant that the FAFSA will tell you if you qualify for it. It goes up to $68.95 for the year. The school will let you know. There's a graduated scale, and the school will let you know specifically how much. If you qualify for a Pell Grant, you could also qualify for the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, which, other than being a mouthful, is also one of those limited dollar grants that the school has a certain amount from the feds. Once those dollars are awarded, they're out the door. So again, meet that priority deadline for the school. The biggest source, though, is the institution themselves. Just like on the scholarship side, the college or university has the most grants that are available and provides the most grants for students. So this is one where, again, check with the college, see if there's anything else they require. Every college is going to require the FAFSA. They might have a separate institutional form, or they might require something called the CSS profile, which I'll talk about in a couple minutes. But just check with them to see if they require any additional forms. If they don't, great, you do the FAFSA, you meet their deadline, you're good to go. If they do require it, just do those extra forms that they need at the same time you're doing the FAFSA. And the grant can be a couple $100 on up the full tuition room and board as well, depending on that school. The last one up here is really not a grant, but I don't have any place else to put it, but it's the Florida Prepaid Plan. So if any of you have Florida Prepaid, You use that at any school that you want. So something, a little known fact is you can use that at a private college in the state of Florida. You can also take it out of state. If your student really wants to go out of state, they can take it with them too. I don't recommend it just because Florida has so many great schools here and we've got Bright Futures and all the other great state programs. But if your student wants to go out of state, you absolutely can use it out of state. It'll pay roughly $3,000 to $4,000 a year. It depends on what plan you have and what extra fees that are covered. If you have the dorm plan, it pays another $4,000 or $5,000, I think, on the dorm side. So it just depends on the plan that you have. If you go to a public college or university in the state of Florida, it covers whatever percentage you purchased. Could be 100%, could be whatever percentage. If you go to a private school, it's just like out of state, it's $3,000 to $4,000 a year. Another little known fact is if you have Florida prepaid, you can also get Bright Futures. So even if you have 100% tuition covered, and it's right on their frequently asked questions if you go to Florida prepaid site, you can get Florida prepaid and Bright Futures, so you actually have a little bit left for room and board if you want to do that. The other thing you can do with prepaid is save it for graduate school or transfer it to another sibling. So there's lots of other flexibilities with it if your student gets Bright Futures. So don't fret if you have Florida prepaid and your student gets Bright Futures and you're like, what do I do? Call the school, see what fits best for your student, and that way you can save those dollars for other students or get maximum benefit for your student at that school. The great thing about everything I've talked about so far is what we call stackable. You can absolutely get every single one of the things I've talked about so far. You can get Bright Futures, you can get Benequisto, you can get the academic scholarship at that college, you can get an athletic award, you can get a music award, you can get an outside scholarship, you can get the state grants, the federal grant, and the institutional grants plus Florida prepaid. So you can see how very quickly that all can add up and help reduce your costs at the schools. But it does take some time and effort in getting those things done. Okay, so we're going to switch gears and get into the self-help money. So these are things that either have to be repaid or have to be earned. Loans will be first, and loans are something, I mean, you've heard about them in the news. There's been some forgiveness. There's students that have been really struggling with them. First off, no one wants you to have to borrow. No college wants to offer loans. They don't want you to have to borrow. They are there if you need a little bit of extra help. There's over 6,000 colleges, I forget the exact number now, over 6,000 colleges and universities in the United States, lots of great schools here in the state of Florida, lots of places you can go to without having to borrow. So if you want to find a good academic fit, but also a good financial fit, so there's lots of options for you to go. If you need to borrow, it still is a good investment in the future, as long as you're only borrowing what you need to cover for tuition, room, and board. So to limit the amount you're borrowing, if you think about probably your career and your life, borrowing isn't bad. You may have borrowed for a car or for your house. It's over borrowing. It's when you get in over your head with over borrowing when it becomes a problem. So limit what you have to borrow if you have to borrow. If you have to borrow, we always encourage you to stick with just a federal loan program. On the student side, there's what's called subsidized or unsubsidized. The only difference between the two is who pays the interest on it while the student's in school. Subsidized, the feds pay the interest. The unsubsidized, the student's responsible for it while they're in school. Once the student graduates, then they're responsible for that interest for the next 10 years or however long it takes them to pay it off. What I have up here are the subsidized maximums. So if your student is a first-year student in college, they can get $3,500. As a second-year student, it's $4,500. As a third and a fourth year, they can get $5,500 each year. If your student has to borrow, and they keep it to those maximums, if you add all that up, I think it's about $19,000. If your student graduates with $19,000 of student loan debt, that's actually manageable. There's lots of repayment options for them to pay that off. It's when they're borrowing a lot more than that. It's when they're getting into private loans, and there's private loans as an option. Parent loans, you can take out loans as well if you want to help meet whatever those balances are. My caveat to that is if you're taking $20,000 out in the first year, multiply that times 4 because you're going to need it every year. Very quickly you're going to be up there and tuition goes up and room and board goes up. So very quickly you're at $100,000 once that student graduates. So that's what you have to do. Again, that's a family decision, but I'd recommend looking at lots of other options. There's lots of schools that might be a better financial fit. So it's my soapbox on loans. Work study and employment is another thing. I think this is a great option for students to work on campus, earn some extra dollars, whether it's a paycheck or we refer to as non-monetary compensation, like maybe free room or reduced room cost or maybe free meals. We call it board. I need to change that. I don't know why colleges call it board, but it's meals. So you might get free meals as well. 3 different programs. Federal work study and the state program are both need-based. When you fill out the FAFSA, there's a question that says, are you interested in work study? And I always tell students to say yes. Always say yes, because the college typically makes a determination on that question. If you say no and you're eligible, the college typically won't offer it to you because they figure you already said no, so why would I give it to you? If you say yes, you still have full control. If you don't want it or if you decide it doesn't fit, you can always decline. It doesn't change your other aid, but at least keeps you in control and gives you those options if you want to do it. So federal work study and the state work programs are the same in terms of there's a limited dollar amount that the school has. Students can work lots of different jobs on campus and earn those extra dollars. Institutional work programs are non-need based, where a student can work on campus and still earn dollars. They're a little bit more limited. There may not be as many jobs available, but admission usually hires the great tour guides that can walk backwards across campus, and some departments will also hire students. So there's different programs available. You can go to the colleges. Usually it's a student employment website you can go to, or just search for student employment. You'll be able to find the jobs that are available. Your student can apply for those. There are lots of national studies that show students that work on campus actually have a higher GPA. They retain at a higher rate, which means they're going to graduate on time. And that saves you dollars. If they're not on the 6-year plan, you're going to save tuition in that. So I encourage you to look at work study. The other reason is when they get some job experience by working on campus, once they graduate, now they've got references. Every year I get calls from employers that say, hey, so-and-so worked for you. What can you tell me about? And they listed you as a reference. And I can give them a great reference because they worked in my office and I know what they did. They also have job experience. They can put down what they did in those offices. So those are things that not every student has. So it's a great opportunity for those students to list when they graduate. But as parents, you also have someone else that's going to look out for your kids. Every school I've been at and all my colleagues across the state do the same thing. They hire work study students in their office, and every day they're checking in with them and saying, how are you doing, how are classes going, and making sure that they have everything they need as a student, because they're a student first. If they have a break or they have a test coming up, they can ask off, no problem. They don't have to find replacement for them or someone to cover their shift. They're a student first. So it's a great opportunity for students to get some extra skills, but again, have someone else looking out for your students. So they get acclimated very quickly. And every year I always get parents that say, well, no, I don't want my kid to do that. I want them to figure out campus life and to figure out all the things they want to do. They'll look for a job in October or November. I say do the opposite, because if they're looking in October or November, there's very few jobs available, or it's the jobs that nobody else wanted and won't fit in their schedule. So look early, get the jobs that fit best. Typically students are working 8 to 10 hours a week. They can't work many more than that, federal requirement, so it's not a lot of work. They can fit it in their schedule. They can work as few as a couple hours a week if that's all that fits in their schedule. That's fine. If they start it and they don't like it or it doesn't fit, they can quit. No harm, no foul. But again, if they wait too long, they may not find that job. So look early, because that's when everyone's looking, is right at the time of classes, August and September. All right, so let's get into the forms themselves. So FAFSA is the main form, the free application for federal student aid. It opens every October 1st, and your students need to do it each and every year if they qualify for need-based aid. It is a standardized form. It is a student application. So even though parents, you're probably filling it out for them or helping them significantly filling it out, it's in the student's name. So whenever you see you or your, it means student. Make sure we're listing the student Social Security number, their name, date of birth, all that's what ties the student to it. The information on there is used to calculate what's called an EFC, or expected family contribution, and that's going to be the same for every college that your student looks for. The college is then going to use that EFC to help determine how much aid they qualify at that particular college. What you'll need is, the first thing is a username and password. You can set that up beforehand. Again, the FAFSA is open now, so you can do it all in one shot, or you can go out there and just do the username and password. Student needs one, and also the parent. One parent needs a username and password as well. Student's going to start it, they'll get their username and password, they'll start the FAFSA, and then there'll be a place for the parent to enter their information a little bit later. I always encourage you to have the student's Social Security number, whether it's a card, the Social Security card, or if you have your tax return out, because there's usually a match that goes against Social Security and your tax returns, to make sure you get the right Social Security number for your student. That's still the most often missed, or most often error put on the FAFSA. And if you miss the Social Security number on the FAFSA, you put the wrong Social Security number, you transpose a number, you typically don't find out for a while that that's the problem, and now you're much further in the process and you almost have to start back over on the FAFSA to get it fixed. So just double and triple check that the first time, that the student's Social Security number is right when you're putting it on there. And again, those are two different ways to do it. On the school section, you can list up to 10 different colleges. Your student may not know all the colleges yet that they want to apply to, and that's okay. You can still list as many as you know right now, and then as they come across another school, they might find something in December or January and say, oh, I found this great school, I want to apply to them. You can go back in and add them, no problem. If your student has more than 10 schools, which we've seen a lot of students doing that now, which is fine, you still have to do the FAFSA with 10 colleges. Then once it's processed, you can go back in and take a couple off and add those extra schools at that point. Make sure it's been processed first. That way those 10 schools get the information, and then once you add those 2 or 3 extra schools, those 2 or 3 schools will get the information as well. So you can always go back in and add them at any point though. Even if your student hasn't applied to them, put them on the FAFSA. They can't do anything with it until your student applies, but at least they'll have the FAFSA and be ready to go with that. In terms of what it's going to look for, so the stuff on the left-hand side of the screen here are the things that the FAFSA is going to ask you about. The right hand you get to exclude. So under assets, it's going to look for bank accounts like checking, savings. It'll say cash savings checking on there. The way I explain that is if you got paid today, the FAFSA is going to say what's your value in your checking account as of today. If you got paid today, don't put the value in there today because you're paying bills tomorrow, you're paying your mortgage or whatever your other expenses are. It's really meant to see what's there from month to month, what's been sitting in there and what rolls over. So use that as your kind of your benchmark. Investments are going to be things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, anything outside of a qualified retirement account. So qualified retirement accounts are IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, all of those things are qualified. If you have a stock account or you have a mutual fund, you say, well, this is really my retirement account. If it's not titled as such, you have to count it as an investment. So you have to count it. 529 plans are added in there, so the value of that 529 plan, even if it's in your student's name, gets added in there. If you have any Uniform Gift to Minors Act, UGMA or UTMA accounts, counted there. Income is going to be your adjusted gross income from the tax return. There's a separate line for wages. Some families get a little bit confused. They think it's double counting. It asks for your adjusted gross income to do the calculation on. The wages it asks for because it subtracts out Social Security, like your FICA taxes, it takes out employment taxes. So there's some calculations behind the scenes, so you want to list both. It'll tell you which one it's asking for. Any other income that you have, either interest or dividends or other types of income. Assets, again, that are excluded are the qualified retirement accounts. Your primary home is excluded. If you have a farm, it's excluded. Your income that might come from a rollover is excluded, even though it appears on your tax return. If you have a rollover, it's excluded from the calculation as well. And I'm going to take you through some of the calculations here in a second, but an easy way to make sure you get the income pieces right is to use what's called the income or the IRS data retrieval tool. And this, when you do the FAFSA, it asks, do you want to link with the IRS? If you say yes, it'll link with the IRS, pull in your income, and transfer it so you know it's correct, the college knows it's correct, the feds know it's correct, so everything you'll get is accurate. You'll get an accurate financial aid form. The amount of documents after the fact that you'll be asked to do will be significantly reduced. So I highly encourage you to use it. It definitely saves time. The other form that's out there is this thing called a CSS profile. So there's about 400 colleges and universities that require it. I think in Florida it's just Miami and maybe Stetson. I think they're the only two that require it. It's not a bad thing, it's just an extra form that you do need to fill out. It asks for some additional information. So it will ask, what's the value of your retirement accounts? What's an IRA, 401k, what's the value in those accounts? It'll ask for non-custodial parent information too, whereas the FAFSA only asks for custodial parent. So there are some additional questions that you'll need to answer. The easiest way to find out if your college requires it or not is just Google it. Go to Google, type CSS profile, and name it, and say list of schools. It'll give you all the list of colleges and universities that are out there that require the profile. If in doubt, call the college. They'll tell you whether they need it or not. Again, not a lot need it, but there are some that do, and you don't want to miss out on financial aid, so make sure that you check on it and get it done. All right, so going back to the FAFSA formula for a minute. The way it works is it's going to take two sides of the equation. So you got the parent information on one side and the student information on the other side. And it's going to add it together at the end. So on the parent side, it's going to take the income, the adjusted gross income from the parents, subtract from that what's called an income protection allowance. The income protection allowance is based on how many folks are in your household. And the feds give you an allowance saying that if you have 10 people in your household, it's going to cost X number of dollars to live on, versus if you have 2 in your household, it's going to cost Y number of dollars to live on. If you ever look up that number, you're going to laugh because it's extremely low, whatever they have in there. So just know that that's just a number they're going to use. So it takes your income minus the income protection allowance, minus any taxes, so any U.S. taxes that you have to pay, minus your FICA taxes, minus an employment allowance, because there's a cost for you to go to work. You have to buy business clothes, you have to buy lunches, you have transportation costs, so there's a cost or an expense that comes out of that. Then it comes up with your available income, and then it'll take a percentage of that and say this is the parent's contribution from income. On the asset side, it's a similar calculation where it adds up all the parent assets, again, outside of the home, outside of a qualified retirement account. It'll subtract from that an asset protection allowance. The asset protection allowance is based on the age of the older parent. So that's why there's a question on there to ask what's the older parent's age. So don't get offended, just put the number in there. It'll take that number, multiply it times an allowance, and that's the amount you can have in assets that won't be counted. So let's just say if you're 50 years old, that it says you can have $10,000 of assets in this allowance. So if you had $100,000 in your cash savings checking account and investments outside of a retirement account, you take $100,000 minus the $10,000, so there's $90,000 that's available, then it's a small percentage of that it says can contribute towards education. It'll add the parent contribution from assets to the parent contribution from income to get the parent contribution. If there's only one student in college at the same time, that's the parent contribution. If you have 2, or if you're blessed with 3 or 4 or 5, and we've seen 5 and 6 in school at the same time, you divide it by that number. So if you had 3 in college at the same time, divide it by 3, and that's the parent contribution for that student. On the student side, it's a little bit simpler. It takes the student income, if it's more than $6,000, and I'm rounding, I don't have the exact dollar, but it's about $6,000. If your student earned less than that, it's 0 contribution from income for the student. If it's more than that, it'll take whatever that income minus the $6,000 to come up with the student's available income, and then subtracts out the U.S. tax paid and FICA, and then a small percentage of that. Asset side, there is no allowance. It's just whatever student's assets times a small percentage to come up with student contribution from assets. Add those two together, and that's a student contribution. It adds a student contribution, parent contribution, and that's how you get to the EFC. So it's kind of a high-level, quick view of how it works. It's a publicly available formula. If you just want to Google EFC, you'll get the formula, put you to sleep. There's lots of pages to it, but feel free to look at it if you want to see the details of it. I do it every year. I do what we call a manual calculation, so we can push a button and have it do the calculation, but I manually go through it so I know what's in it, so we have a good understanding of what's going on with it. But that's what the EFC is, and that's going to be the same. Again, it's a student application, so it's the same regardless of what college they're going to apply to. But that's what the FAFSA is going to use for the first part of calculating needs. So set that aside for a second, that's EFC. The second part of the equation is the cost. So this is what it costs at that school. We've broken this into 2 different buckets. We have direct cost, which are things the college is going to bill you for. They're going to bill you for tuition. They might have fees that they're going to bill you for. They'll bill you for housing and meals if you live on campus. There's also some indirect costs. These are things that students are spending, just the college isn't going to bill you for. If they're not living on campus, they're going to have to pay rent. If they're living at home, you're still feeding them, so there's a cost to the meal plan there, or cost of meals there. They're still going to have to buy books and supplies. Then there's a personal and miscellaneous, I call it the pizza and haircut money fund. It's stuff that kids are spending while they're on campus. The college will give you a good estimate of what that is. Doesn't mean it's what your student's going to spend, because your student's going to spend more or less depending on lifestyle and depending on the discussion you've had with them on how they spend their money, but that gives you an idea of what students at that college are spending. Adds it together to come up with what's called a cost of attendance. Every college will have a very different cost of attendance. Even if you looked at all the public schools here in Florida, if you look compared to UF, to UCF, to FSU, or any other public colleges, they're all going to be different. Tuition may be close, but the personal is going to be very different. If you looked at all the private schools, they're all going to be different. There's not going to be any 2 that are exactly the same. So every college is going to have a different cost of attendance. How financial aid works is we take that cost of attendance, that's that direct plus indirect cost, so what you're billed for plus those estimated costs, which are going to be different, again, for every school your student looks at, minus the EFC, which is going to be exactly the same for your students. And that's your financial need. So that's the need that the school is trying to meet. So it's a very simplistic example. Private university might have a cost of attendance of $75,000. The public might be $25,000. Again, it's direct cost plus those estimated room and board or actual room and board plus those estimated costs. EFC is exactly the same. So at a public school, your need might be $65,000. At a private, it might be $65,000. At a public, it might be $15,000. The goal of financial aid is to bridge that gap, trying to meet that need so finances aren't what's making your decision. That's the best fit for the student. Not every college can meet 100% of need. Not every college can fill that gap, but they're going to try to. So that's what the goal, again, getting back to what financial aid is there for. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit here. Net price calculator is something that'll give you a good estimate of what your student qualified for at that school. Typically, we see that used for juniors and younger, but we also see it used for students that are trying to decide whether they want to visit a school or not. So if your student's interested in a school in California, for example, again, they don't want them to go out of state, want them to stay in Florida, but if they are looking at it, you might have them do the net price calculator to see if it makes sense financially before you buy the plane ticket and go out to see them, or before you drive 3 to 4 hours to some other school that's around the state of Florida. Just a good way to see, are they in the ballpark? It won't be exact, but it gives you an idea if that's financially feasible for you. And if it is, then visit that school. If it's not, then you either have to really work harder at the scholarships, get those scholarship levels up, or you might just have to take that school off the list. But that way you know ahead of time. But it gives you a good idea whether you're in the ballpark or not. I put this slide out there. Everything I've talked about so far is exactly what's going to happen for your students. But I want to give you a heads up that in 2 years, things are going to change for your families. Everyone's starting in the fall of 24. So you'll be doing, so again, you're doing the FAFSA now. You'll do the FAFSA for fall of 24 in October of 23, so it'll actually be here before you know it. There are going to be some changes. They're going to have, again, reduced number of questions, which is a great thing. They're going to get rid of lots of income questions that aren't on your tax return, so you can just transfer it from the IRS and then you're done with the income side of it, which is great. They think there's going to be a lot more students eligible for Pell Grants based on how they're changing the formula, which should be great, and they're renaming it from EFC to SAI. The main reason is because right now when you see expected family contributions, some families think, oh, this is what I have to pay to go to school, and that's not necessarily true. It's a factor that each college uses to determine how much aid you qualify for. So they're changing it to an index to more accurately reflect what it is. So there are going to be some changes coming down the line. Once your student enters college or university, they'll probably hear from the financial aid office about this next September and October. Once you start hearing about it, make sure you pay attention because there might be some other changes that come with it. So just check into that and they'll be able to help you. Again, it's not for a year from now, but just kind of giving you a heads up on it. All right, so in terms of a timeline that you want to look for, right now, again, complete the admission stuff, get all those admission applications in as soon as you can. We're in October, so do the FAFSA. When I give this presentation before October, I always tell folks don't do it on October 1st because the thing crashes almost every year. I've done workshops on the 1st, and I've said, please let's not do it, but it crashes every time. My guideline to you all is to do it before the end of the month, do it before Halloween. If you do it by then, you'll have met every college's priority financial aid deadline. There's no college that requires it done before November 1st. I guarantee you that. So just get it done before the end of the month. That way you've done everything you can to get the maximum amount of financial aid at the colleges that you're interested in. Still got to get all the admission stuff done, but at least you can have the FAFSA knocked out and be all done with that. December and January, you might start to hear from the colleges. There might be some additional forms they need. We call it verification, but the college will let you know what that form is if you need to do it. If you did that IRS data retrieval tool, it's unlikely that you need to do any more forms, but they'll let you know. You'll start to receive your financial aid offer letter. That's the different types of aid that you're going to receive, so whether it's a grant, scholarship, loan, or work study. If you get that and you can't decide or you can't figure out easily what it is it a scholarship, is it a grant, is it a loan, make sure you talk with that financial aid office. You want to know exactly what's on there and what your bottom line is. You don't want to go into it thinking, oh, I've got everything covered, and then find out later all of it was a loan and now you're in a different situation. So make sure you understand that offer letter. Most colleges have gotten much better at their offer letters, but if you're not sure, check with them. If you can't get a hold of them or you have trouble with that, feel free to give me a call. I'll put my information up here at the end. You're welcome to reach out. If I can't figure it out, that's a problem, and I'll call the financial aid office, make sure. But again, for the most part, all the colleges around here have been really good about it. Actually, I should back up to October, should add this, but when you're doing the FAFSA, check to see if they need that additional form, so that CSS profile or their own institutional form. If they do, get that done at the same time you do the FAFSA. Do the FAFSA first, and then do either profile or the institutional form. Again, not every college has it, and most don't, but just confirm that. I should add that in there. March and April, reply to any offers of aid. If there are things you need to do, sometimes you have to accept the offers. So accept the work study or accept one of the scholarships, or if you want the loans, you might have to accept it or decline it. Just make sure you reply to that and say, I want it or I don't. Again, on the work study, I would still say accept it until your student has a chance to look at the jobs that are available, and then it's up to them and you guys what you want to do with that. I should have asked you this, Marcia, ahead of time, but for Bright Futures, do you guys do the state of Florida application?
Yes.
Cool. So you guys have an advantage. There is a separate form for Bright Futures that your students has to do every year, but they're going to help your students do it, so that's great. That's one of the often missed things that students miss out on, so perfect. You guys are set. May 1st is the admission deadline, so it's national, they call it National Candidate Reply Date. You need to let the admission office know whether you're coming or not. My only caveat to that is if you don't know the financial aid offer, I'd be wary of accepting and putting a deposit in, because when you put a deposit in, it's typically non-refundable. So make sure you know what your bottom line is. If you're getting into April and you haven't received the financial aid offer by then, I would call the financial aid office and say, I'm really interested, my kid really wants to come here, where's my financial aid offer? And there might be something else they need to do. So make sure you get that before you make your deposit. If you get any outside scholarships, make sure you let the school know about them. For the most part, they'll be able to include them in your current offers and add it right in there. There are some cases where they have to reduce other aid, so that's why you want to know about it as soon as possible. That way there's no surprises at the end. Again, for the most part, they can add it right in with what you have, though. And then just my last slide here is just some helpful websites. Studentaid.gov is where you're going to do the FAFSA, so you can go out there right now and do it. It also has lots of good information on the federal programs. FastWeb and scholarships.com are those private scholarship databases that I mentioned. There's a lot of them out there. You can go with anyone. If your school recommends others, that's perfectly fine. There's lots of them out there. These we found to have some success with from our students. FloridaStudentFinancialAid.org is the state of Florida's website, so that's got more information on Bright Futures and Benequisto and all those state programs. And then that's my email address, just sbooker@rollins.edu. And I'm absolutely serious about it. If you have questions about this having nothing to do with Rollins, please just email me. I'm happy to get those questions. You can also go through your counselors here. If you want to stay anonymous, go to them and they'll email me and I'll provide the information. We want to, again, make sure you get your questions answered, get as much financial aid as possible wherever you're going. And I've got great colleagues throughout the state at different schools, and they all want to do the same thing. So that's what we're here to do. So with that, I'll go ahead and pause here and answer any questions that you all might have. No questions, wow. Please.
Is financial aid negotiable? So if I get a package and you still can't afford to come to your school, could I contact the financial aid?
Great question. There's an article out about here's the ways I can get more aid, and one of them is negotiate. What I'll tell you is most schools don't. Most schools are going to provide the best foot forward. You've got to make your decision in a relatively short period of time, because you're getting the financial aid offer in December, January, sometimes February, and you have until May 1st to make your decision. If there's all this back and forth, typically doesn't work. What I can tell you is my experience from where I've worked, as well as a few of the colleagues that I know, they won't negotiate. It's not a give and take. We want to give you as much as we can up front. We'd always love to give you more, but it's only if there's something we miss. So we always tell families, let us know. You're welcome to show us offer letters from other schools. We'll look at it, and if they gave you one type of award and we didn't, and it's a universal award, like one of the state grants, that either they have more information than we do or we have more information than we do. It's not you're not going to get that at one school and not the other. You get it at both. So we want to make sure you have all the information. So it never hurts to ask, and sometimes that opens up other questions. And one of the biggest things might be maybe there's a change of income that happened. So maybe on the FAFSA, it always looks for 2-year-old income. So as you're filling the FAFSA out now, your student starts in fall of 23, so you have to subtract 2 years from that. It's looking at the 21 tax return, so the one you did this last spring. So it's going to look at your income and adjusted gross from 21. If your income in 2022 is significantly less, talk to the school. They'll be able to take a look at that. Or if in 23 your income is less, talk to the school. And that's where that might bring up those conversations. So talk with the school. Again, you can ask them about other aid. They likely won't negotiate, but they'll be happy to look to see if there's other circumstances that they can help you out with, for sure. Please.
With the FAFSA, is it secure to put in the child's social security number in there? And do they sell that information to other marketing companies, or is it?
That's a great question. What's funny is this is the first year I've gotten that question, and every presentation I've gotten, I've had that same question. And I don't know if it's just because of all the news reports out there, but it is secure. It's only, the feds are the only ones that have that information. They're not selling your information elsewhere. So it is secure. It is a requirement because it's a federal database. They're matching up against Homeland Security to make sure the student's a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. They're matching it up against the student loan database that's held by the feds to make sure the student hasn't borrowed before and is defaulted on student loans. What's the other one they're looking at? They used to be looking at selective service. I think that's it though. But it is a requirement, but it's the highest security because it's the feds using it. The only place that information goes, it's the school that you've released it to. So again, you can list up to 10 different schools. Each school has to have their own set of privacy requirements, and they have to attest to it every year. It's something that my president and every college's president has to attest to, that they will keep it secure, as well as the state. So the state of Florida gets that information because you can get need-based state aid. And again, same thing, they have to have the same level of security protocols. But those are the only places it goes, it's not sold. But that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
3 questions.
Yeah.
The first is
I can't do 3. Go ahead.
in case you wanted to sit down.
Go right ahead.
Period. The first one is on Florida prepaid.
Yeah.
Is Florida prepaid, are you, for lack of a better word, penalized by having Florida prepaid? Is that calculated in your?
No, it's not. The great thing is, several years ago, they just pulled it out of the types of aid. So now whatever aid you get, whatever need you have, you get, and then that's on top of the additional that you have, yeah. So you could have, if you go back to the formula I gave, the example, the public schools like 15,000 and private is 65, whatever those numbers were. If you got need-based aid that met that whole amount, you still can get Florida prepaid on top of that.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
And then my next question is similar. If I were to have, if my need was met, you mentioned that with outside scholarships,
Yeah.
that there may be an issue where the money would be reduced.
Yep.
Is that in every state? I know that's true in Florida, but if I were to go to, I think, Maryland, is that the case in other states?
It's every college. Every college that receives federal aid has to do that. So it's a federal requirement that you take any scholarships first, so whatever that need number is, the gross financial need, subtract scholarships first, and then what's left is you could put need-based aid in.
Okay.
So in the example of the $15,000 of need, if you got all scholarships, that's not need-based, so you could get full tuition, you can get $70,000 of aid, doesn't matter. But if you get to $1 of need-based money, it's capped then at $15,000 of other scholarships. Once you get to that number, you can't get any more need-based aid.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. So then the only way I could get more money for college, if I have a financial need, is to really get it through scholarships.
Right.
That won't penalize me for having more
Yep.
scholarships.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's where, again, all those outside scholarships matter, because maybe you've got $5,000 of a need-based grant, but if you get an outside scholarship of $15,000, you're still far ahead now. You're getting more than what you've gotten before. The $5,000, again, assume you're at full need, that they've already met your full need. That $5,000 need-based scholarship goes away, but now you're getting 15, so you gain 10,000 in that deal. So, and then if that outside scholarship happens to go away the second year, you can still get need-based grant for that second year. So that doesn't necessarily, you don't lose it forever, whereas scholarships, if you don't get it going in, a lot of times you won't get it in subsequent years.
And then my last question is on disability income. How is that counted in the family?
Social Security disability is not. So there's a place that it would say that you, on the FAFSA it says exclude these types of income, and Social Security disability is one of those.
Okay.
Yep. Good question.
Those are my questions.
Yeah. That reminded me of one other one that I get a lot is on veterans. If any of you are veterans or if you have connections with veterans, there's lots of great veterans programs available. So there's what's called the Yellow Ribbon Program. If a student or if a veteran qualifies for that, they can transfer those benefits to a student and it covers tuition at 100% at most schools. The school will typically kick in to cover the rest of it if the VA doesn't cover all of it. And there's also a housing stipend that goes with it. And then if you're a student or if you have a veteran that qualifies for disability or they have a death related to the veteran status, then there's a Child of Disabled and Deceased Veterans program here in the state of Florida that provides a lot of funding as well. So the kind of takeaway on that is if we have any veterans, talk with the school, they'll connect you with the right programs for that school and what you can qualify for.
Is it just for parents or for grandparents as well?
It's typically just the parents that would transfer to their dependent. Yep. Any other questions? Okay, well with that, I'll let you guys go. Thank you for coming out and good luck in your college search. This is going to be a fun, fast year.